Welcome to Easy Math TV. This is a continuation of our statistics series using Excel and other tools. And we're going to just continue our topic here on confidence intervals. We did 2 videos on the confidence interval for a mean, for a population mean. And now we're going to talk about confidence interval on a proportion. So remember that a proportion is usually the data that we've collected is categorical in nature, or it's not quantitative, but it's qualitative data. And we're talking about a proportion of results that satisfy a certain condition, or that satisfied a certain result. So basically, I'm going to read a problem to you here, and then we'll talk about how to solve it. So the problem is, a claim was made that the actual number of American adults that favor current U.S. policy toward Israel is less than 60%, that the true percentage is less than 60% of American adults favor our current U.S. policy toward Israel. So a sample was taken of 982 adults, randomly sampled, and out of those 982, 501 said that they were in favor of current policy. So we're going to create a 98% confidence interval of the true proportion to test that claim. So we're going to see if the 60% truly is outside of what we would consider to be a reasonable estimate for the true proportion phi. And let me just mention that you see this unusual symbol up here where it says true proportion. There's a symbol next to there. That is the Greek letter phi. It is also sort of like what we use as a letter P in place of a letter P. So the true proportion is what we're going to call phi, and the lowercase p with a caret over it, we're going to call that p hat, and that is our estimate. That is our point estimate for the proportion. Okay, p hat. P hat is always going to be a number between 0 and 1 because it's basically a percentage. So it's like a percent of the results that fell under a certain category. And so you can see over here in columns B and C is where I've placed, that's where we're going to put our data, like just our numbers, and then do any calculations that need to be made before we do our upper limit and our lower limit for P for the true proportion of adults. Okay? So let's talk about each of the things that we see over here. So depending on the problem that you're given, sometimes you're just given what the proportion of a sample was. So sometimes it'll just tell you, like, oh, 50.2% of adults in the survey said blah, blah, blah. So if it says 50.2%, then you would actually type that in here into the p hat. You could actually type it in as a percentage, right? But in this problem, we were given our x and our n. That's what we were given. So if 982 adults were sampled or surveyed, then that's your n. So next to sample size n in row 5 here, column C, so that's in cell C5, I just typed 982. We do not have a hypothesized proportion, although I could fill that in here because it is based on the claim. So we could actually put in our 60% as a hypothesized proportion, and it should only have 1% sign there. So we could actually type that in just for our own sense of knowledge. And then sample successes, which is our X. So that is the number of people who reported that they were in favor, okay? Because that's what we're measuring here. What are we interested in? We are interested in the proportion of adults that favor U.S. policy, okay? The proportion of adults that favor U.S. policy. So our sample is out of 982, 501 said that they favored U.S. policy. So 501 out of 982 is going to give us our p hat. So you can see in cell C6, I have typed equals, and I'm dividing the number of x's, C3, divided by n, C5. So the sample proportion is always your x divided by n. Okay, x divided by n. And that is our sample proportion p hat. And type that in there into cell C6. So what you see here in rows 7 and 8 is just a threshold that is required in order to be able to just even do this process. We cannot do this process if these two numbers that we see in cells C7 and C8 are not bigger than 6. So the number that you see in cell C7 is always going to equal your p hat times your sample size. It equals p hat times the sample size. So equals C6 times C5. And that usually ends up being just your n, or your x. So this is the value of x, all right? But you're not always told what x is, and that's why I'm telling you that you can just calculate that by taking your p hat and multiplying it by your sample size n, because that's usually given to you in the problem. The other test threshold then is going to equal 1 minus p hat times n. So equals parenthesis 1 minus C6 close parenthesis times C5. That's going into cell C8. So those two numbers, which we have there's no problem here. Those two numbers just have to be bigger than 5, 6 or more. And so we had a pretty large sample here, and it was close to the middle of it, that, it was close to 50% that were in one category or the other. So you definitely have met your threshold there. Okay, so that was just something we needed to check. Now in cell C9, we type our standard error of a proportion. So we call this SEP, standard error of a proportion. And so just pay attention to this formula because it's a little bit complicated. It's equals SQRT, square root, parenthesis, and it's C6 times, parenthesis, 1 minus C6, close parenthesis, slash or divide by C5, and then another close parenthesis. So you've got parentheses inside of parentheses here, so just be really careful how you type it in. The innermost set of parentheses is around the 1 minus C6. That gets multiplied by C6, and then that whole thing gets divided by C5. And that entire calculation there, we just need to take the square root of it. All right? So equals SQRT, parenthesis, and it's C6 times another parenthesis, 1 minus C6, right parenthesis, slash C5, and another right parenthesis, and hit enter. So our standard error of proportion for this particular problem should be 0.015952,332. Okay. Our confidence level is given in the problem. It's 98%. And our cumulative probability is just as we've mentioned in our two previous videos on confidence intervals. This has to be our confidence level plus the left tail. So it's equals C10 plus 0.5 times parenthesis 1 minus C10 close parenthesis. All right, so that looks the same in all three videos that we've done on this topic of confidence intervals. Again, equals C10 plus 0.5 times parenthesis 1 minus C10 close parenthesis. So that accounts for the 98% plus half of what's left over, and half of 2% is 1%. 98 plus 1% is 99%. So then we need our z value. When you're doing a confidence interval on a proportion, we use the z statistic. So in cell C12, type equals norm.s.inv, parenthesis, and then we need our cumulative probability that we just calculated in C11 inside the parentheses, and then close parenthesis. So again, that's equals norm.s.inv, parentheses, C11, close parenthesis. Okay. So our true proportion, the true portion of adults who favor current U.S. policy towards Israel is going to be somewhere between the lower limit and the upper limit that we're going to calculate here. And the lower limit is given as your p hat minus your margin of error. And the margin of error for a proportion is z times SE, p. Okay? So here's what you type into cell F9, because I have the lower limit in F9 and I have the upper limit in F10. Because above it is just a picture of what the confidence interval looks like. So here's what you type into F9, equals C6 minus C12 times C9. Because your p hat is in C6, so that is your point estimate for the true proportion. We got that from a survey, from a sample that we took. So that survey result is a point estimate of the true proportion. So it doesn't tell us that exactly 51% of Americans favor current U.S. policy. We know that it's got to be some range around that, because one sample is not enough to tell you exactly how many Americans favor U.S. policy. You would have to survey every single American in the United States, every single adult, right? Every single adult American in the United States would have to be surveyed if you wanted to get the exact proportion, and that's impossible to do. So that's why sampling will give us kind of a margin of error, or an interval. So lower limit equals C6 minus C12 times C9. And again, those are the three cells that have our z value, our standard error, and our p hat. Okay? That's the lower limit. The upper limit then is going to equal C6 plus C12 times C9. So those are the two numbers that we came up with, 0.473 if we round it to the nearest thousandth, and 0.547, but round that up. If the upper limit should be rounded up, so that would be 0.548. So our results are telling us that the true proportion of adults who favor current U.S. policy in Israel is somewhere between 47.3% and 54.8% of adults. So guess what? So let's look at our claim then. we're testing that claim. So since 60% is outside the confidence interval, we have sufficient evidence to support the claim. Because the claim is that fewer, see, look what the claim is. The claim is that the true percentage is less than 60%. So I'm going to highlight that, or I'm going to color that in a different color. Less than 60%. And our sample gives us a confidence interval that ranges from 47.3% to 54.8%. That entire interval is less than 60%. Okay? That entire interval is less than 60%. So we do have sufficient evidence to support that claim that the true proportion is less than 60%. And it has to be, the entire interval has to be less than 60% for us to be able to say that, okay? But that's what the purpose of your confidence interval is. It helps you to sort of make inferences about your population. Like, subscribe, comment down below, share these videos with other people that are taking statistics. I hope you're finding them helpful, and that's going to be it on confidence intervals. The next couple videos that you see me post will be on hypothesis testing for a mean and a single proportion. Okay? I'll see you in the next video.